Hello, community members. My name is Faven Ibarra. I'm the social media manager with the Jackson Park Project, and which focuses on the ongoing process of emancipation here in Canada, along with telling other important stories in Canadian Black history. Today, we're all watching history unfold as the result of the global reaction to the recent murder of George Floyd. Our screens are filled with images of passionate protesters from Black communities and their allies, which have sparked demand for profound change. And George Floyd's story is sadly not unique, but is one in a long line of similar deaths that have stretched back in history. We have three guests, Leslie and her mother Patricia, along with Abdi Hussein, our three guests who have both been on the front lines of protests, but also been taking this much further into activism through the work they have been dedicating their lives to. We have three generations of guests here to welcome y'all to the table. I guess we'll start with our first question. So what are your greatest hopes for this current movement and your greatest concerns?
Well, my greatest hope is that the movement will continue on. And my greatest concern right now is that it's during this coronavirus period. And I hope that not too many people will be injured by the virus or lose their life because they wanted to protest for human rights.
My greatest hope is that, something will actually come to fruition, but I mean, it's going to take some patience and work. I mean, already you have Mitch McConnell in the Senate in the United States trying to work to stall any real change in policing over there, which is something it's going to be important. And over here in Canada, we always have to fight the whole Canadian ideology that there is no racism in Canada, although the Prime Minister has finally said it and people are finally starting to speak it. I want to make sure that that's not just political expediency, but that some real true action and change actually takes place. And that's my greatest fear, is that after all of, everybody says the right things and the corporations donate their money and, people get healthy and go back to work, that it'll all die out and no real change will be made.
Yeah, I think I've heard it been saying that, the hope is that it's a movement, not just a moment. Right? It's not just like this hashtag thing or, everyone's just jumping on the bandwagon at the last minute and then kind of just phases out. That's the hope. And I'm really glad. I'm also hoping for it to continue on as an intergenerational thing, or that it would become an intergenerational thing where we're actually listening to each other and learning from one another and not just, trying to move something forward or reinventing the wheel. We can learn from what others have done before us, so that we can build on it as opposed to, try to recreate something that probably has already been done before, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree a lot with that last point. Thank you for that, because really, okay, so my greatest hope is that we start to really rely on ourselves, learn to build like systems that we can trust within ourselves, and have a less of a dependency on government, as hard as that may seem. From just the observations of the things that I've read from the past and whatnot, they might give like a bit of leeway, and then once we forget about it and the fire is gone, they'll go right back into it in another way. So I want us to be the ones that care for us and build those systems for each other. And hopefully, again, like I hope that it's not just a moment, right? My biggest fear is that we focus a bit too much, I guess, on allyship, right? I feel like it's a very important, crucial key, but like I think it's just on social media. I've been seeing a lot of like people almost saying to their non-Black friends, like, if they don't do this, I don't want to talk to you. But for me, it's like, if they didn't already know Black Lives Mattered, it's like you were never my friend to begin with, So I want us to focus more on like what we can do for each other. I don't want support from others. I want support from the people that are going through it, because we're the ones that are going to take each other out of it, hopefully.
Yeah, just to kind of echo and I guess backtrack a little on what's been said before, my greatest hope is that kind of this momentum keeps going, like everyone's been saying. Like Patricia mentioned, COVID is a really kind of unique factor in that the experience of just trying to like live through a global pandemic is already very exhausting and even like traumatizing on its own. And then this current fever that's come up is just that magnified on top of it. So it's hard for people to sustain that energy, and I hope that they will. My greatest concern, I guess, specifically for Canadians in kind of this global moment is, like Leslie mentioned, just getting past that kind of wall that exists where having people acknowledge that racism exists in Canada, and then B, not kind of do the deflection that's very common of, oh, well, if we do have some, it's not as bad as the States. So, ergo, we don't have to worry too much. It's not as bad as America. So let's kind of relax. And hopefully it seems like there's sentiment in Canada that's pushing past that. But the long term, how that changes in the long term will be interesting to see. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add that regarding the COVID, on one hand, I think we can be thankful to the COVID for the fact that so many people were sitting at home and actually paying attention to what was occurring, because there have been heinous deaths of Black men that have occurred like forever. But there weren't enough people who actually like witnessed it to feel, that something really needed to be done. I mean, we as Black people have been saying forever there needs to be change. And there have been some white people that have seen it and said, yeah, they're right. But now it's like everybody was sitting at home and saw it. So on one hand, although the COVID virus is very dangerous, I think we can be thankful for allowing our cries to be finally heard and the inequities to be exposed in so many different ways because of this illness.
So I guess I have a follow-up question. Do you guys feel that a lot of argument with the current protests and everyone out in the streets during social distancing is the fact that it's irresponsible? So that it's putting people's lives in danger, and it's not like you're risking more folks risking the spread of the virus, yada, yada, yada. What are your thoughts on those arguments?
You know what I think is irresponsible? I think it's irresponsible to kill Black men like the way that they're doing. And I think when someone has our foot on our necks, they can't complain on how we want to get that foot off, because we're just struggling to survive. And like if we're in a position where we actually have to think of like a pandemic, being in the way of that, and we're still going out to do it, it should show the severity of the issue of what's going on. True. Like we can't breathe, literally, like all of us. So people that are undermining the fact that, the way that we're doing it, or that we're not caring about so on and so forth, don't understand the reason why we're doing it. For me personally, all we could do is pray that none of us get it and mask up and of course take the proper precautions. But if we don't go out there and do it, those people that are complaining won't do it for us, is my personal opinion.
Well, I think that most people that are out there are trying to take the proper precautions so that they will be able to continue on with the movement. And the movement seems to be right now much different than the movements in the past. In the past, they were groups of people who came together from states or cities and moved and fought in their own areas for civil rights and human rights. And they changed some of the laws, but now it's a much greater thing. The people are coming from all over, and it is a very diverse group of people. Everybody is out there, and it's all around the world. So it's more than just a movement, it's a moment that change has to occur, because everybody is in on it now. And when they saw the killing of Mr. Floyd, I think it shook a lot of people up. They never thought anything like this was happening. And when you see 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a death of a person who was unarmed and not able to fight back, it takes a lot out of you. So I think that's what's getting the people out there and making them really, really realize that something has to change, and they've got to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in order for this change to happen, what needs to be done to move forward in a sustainable way to make the change permanent and fruitful?
Well, I think they have to work on the legislation. They've got to go change laws, change the government, get in there themselves and be a part of the government, not let others be the power structure. And they have to change the social activities, and they have to have moral change. And they have to change the inequities in our society. The corporations have too much power, and they are not making the change. They're making it harder for people. And when poor people are the problem, then something is wrong, because there shouldn't be poor people. There should be more equity within our society. They call it socialism. Well, socialism, then let it be, because nobody should be dying on the streets and so poor that they have to commit crimes and have the police after them all of the time.
Gosh, Mom, all you're saying is we got to change the world.
That's it.
I have to agree, though, with Abdidan when he said that we need to take more personal responsibility. Like, even regarding the learning of our history, we know that in the society we live, up until recently, we weren't even noticed. Now, all of a sudden, Black Lives Matter. And I agree also that if Black lives didn't matter before this, you weren't necessarily my friend. But we also have to take the responsibility, I think, to teach ourselves and nurture ourselves. Now, understanding that after slavery ended, we created our own communities. We had our own Wall Street. We had our own schools. We had our own stores. We had our own businesses. It was burned up. It was blown up. I mean, it was destroyed, but we still have that capability, right? Mm. I remember when I went to school, in elementary school, I went to had Jewish friends, and they came to elementary school. Then on Saturday, they went to Hebrew school, and they learned about their history and their religion and stuff. And so maybe we need to take the responsibility of teaching our history to our children ourselves. Maybe we have, if they don't have Afrocentric education in the education that is being afforded us, maybe we create it on Saturdays where our kids come to community centers or whatever we create by ourselves, where we teach them ourselves, where we engage them ourselves, where we mentor them ourselves. But I think ourselves have to do some work to heal our community amongst ourselves, because there's still too much disparity amongst us all too, as we're trying to forge our way throughout the world. There's still, I know in Windsor I can speak, but there's still the Black Canadian Indigenous community. Those are the descendants of the Underground Railroad. Then you have the Nigerian community, Somalian community, the Jamaican community, and everybody's disparate, and we need to all come together under one, umbrella as the African diaspora and heal each other and come together, because it's that divide and conquer technique that works to keep us separated and from actually working together for our common goal. And that is our culture originally, is working together for the common good of all of us. And we need to find our way back to that.
Yeah. I agree so much with that, because I feel like as a Pan-African community, we were broken down and dissipated specifically through colonialism, which, as evil as it was, they were very strategic. They wanted to take away our culture, they wanted to take away our history, because they knew there was embedded power in that, right? So when you say let's get back together, I feel that takes a specific level of hope. Although we may not have seen it for very long, we can hope to do that ourselves. And although we might not even recognize what that might look like, we can still do it. And just to answer your question, Fevin, of how to keep it regenerative, I feel like the anger and the hate, it fuels and it sparks that fire. It's a catalyst, right? But to keep it going, we have to remember the love that we have for ourselves, the love that we have for our communities, the pride that we take in our own culture and in our own people, and like that yearning to want more about ourselves. And I feel like once that gets into place, as angry as we were, that could burn us out, right? I know a lot of my friends are already burning out, and like they've been going so hard that like they're just all taking a break from everything. And for us to continue to do it, like that anger was a great start, but we have to remember like why we need to do this. And our oppressors aren't going to ever tell us to love ourselves. That's something that we have to tell each other constantly, what we love about ourselves and what we love about others. And I think that's the way to keep it regenerative, hopefully, for that future.
Yeah, that's a good start, but we have to love ourselves, and we have to believe in ourselves and our own worth. Mm-hmm. And once we do that, if we want to teach each other Black history, that's just a starter also. We've got to teach it to everyone, especially the white people. They are the ones who started systemic racism, and we can't eliminate it until they realize that they have kept it going through the mass media and through all other ways of communicating that they have. Many of them unconsciously harbor these thoughts, but it's all part of the culture, and we have to change the culture. And in order to do that, we have to educate everybody, not just Black people.
That's interesting, because one of the things that I've been seeing on social media a lot is, you know, from the Black community, are people coming forward and saying, it's not my responsibility to educate you. The information is already out there. You take the responsibility and do the education yourself, as I have and as, you know, whomever has. So that was actually going to be one of my questions, is what do you guys think about that? I'm throwing that out there. Sorry.
No problem.
Because, what are your thoughts on that?
I see the merits of that, but I think one of the things is, like, if you're going to talk about the education system, the truth of the matter is that most of the people who are in decision-making positions for like the education system are still white. Mm-hmm. So like that's not necessarily, it's not saying, you know, Black people do the labor. It's more white people who are educators who do have this position of power. You guys need to take the initiative, and you need to kind of prioritize this history. I was going to say, I'd been thinking earlier, that I see education as kind of one of the key points for sustainability of this movement. And I know from my own personal experience, I didn't start to learn anything. I didn't start to learn anything much about systemic racism as a whole, but then particularly racism against Black people in Canada until I was really in university, undergrad level. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem for a lot of reasons. But even just on the basic level of like, not everyone is going to go or wants to go or can go or whatnot to university. And it's not good enough to say, oh, well, you'll learn about it when you're doing your history BA or whatever. It's something that someone could very easily go their entire life never having to encounter or think about. And that's when you kind of get into this mess. And people are like, what? There were slaves in Canada? There's slavery in Canada? So you have to start at like the basic building blocks, and that just, it takes so much longer to get anywhere if you don't even have that foundation.
Well, that's why I've been lucky enough to live in it. You know, going into schools and teaching those lessons. But it's important that we all learn all of it, just like Mom says, because we didn't get here without white people. So if they don't know the history about how we got here and the experiences we've had, and they are the purveyors of it, then yeah, like Mom said, we're going to have a hard time finding our way out of it. But, you know, it's, as long as we keep pushing towards it, you know, more people are learning. Like, I don't know about what happens in other parts of the country, but I know Nova Scotia has become very active. There are agencies out there that are being very active in making sure that Black history and culture is in the schools and in the education system. I know that now here in Windsor, after forever, all of a sudden, now that Black Lives Matter, they want to come up with a panel to work together to put a curriculum into the school system. And here in Windsor, we have a young teacher by the name of Chantel Browning Morgan who helped to create a curriculum for which she won the Governor General's Award. So, I mean, it shouldn't be really hard for them to find some curriculum because it was created here in Windsor. So I think politically, we do have to make sure that as much of the information is included for the school systems as well. But there's much more to teach than what the school systems are going to teach, especially about our original greatness. I mean, you know, because they don't know about it. So I think it is, in some ways, our responsibility to dig it up and to teach them as we learn it too, because I just don't think that quote unquote white society, outside of trying to assuage Black people as much as little as they possibly can to stop disruption, are necessarily that interested. So, I mean, we've got to take the lead on all of that. I really believe.
Yeah, I think that ties really into like the eagerness to learn, right? Like when I think of it like that, I try to my best way, because it actually boggles my mind about systemic racism, like from a white person's perspective, because I'm like at the exact opposite of the spectrum, right? But one thing I do to try to understand, like, are they willing to learn, or would I be willing to learn if I was in their position, is I think of it like this. When it comes down to it, it's privilege, right? So let's say myself as an able-bodied person today, I have privilege over someone who per se might be in a wheelchair. When that person is in a wheelchair and they enter a building, they are hyper aware of all of the accessibility ramps. Now, for myself as an able-bodied person, what interest would I have to know where all of the wheelchair ramps are in the building? And if someone had come to me and told me, well, all of them were, how often am I to retain all of that information, right? Because it just doesn't affect me, you know? So I kind of see it from that lens, like, as much as, and that's not to say, like, I don't want to be wearing the same shoes as the ones that are oppressing us and just paint everyone one brush. Of course, there are people that are human and care about us and empathize with what we're going through. But for the vast majority that are living with privilege, like, just off of the results I've seen, there's no willingness to learn. And even if we do pitch it to them, I don't see them lending an ear, aside from the fact that they don't want to be seen as racist, you know? So it's going to be a hard fight. And I agree with Patricia, we're going to be going for, like, you know, systemic racism. Like, that's the end goal, is to end it. And hopefully we need everyone to understand it. It's just, like, really hard. It's all I'm saying, you know?
Well, it'd be easier if we started with the legislation and get some of the laws changed. And once the laws are changed, then it's much easier for people who aren't affected to understand what's going on. Because hardly any people know what's happening with the Native people on the reservations. They don't even know the hard times that they're having. And they don't even know that they tried to once become a part of the legislation, and they weren't allowed to. They put white people over telling what should be done for the Native people, instead of Native people telling what should be done for them to survive the way they want to survive and to keep their culture.
I think I'm gonna put a little, like, this is gonna tie in with everything that everyone has been saying. But for me, as a generation immigrant, my parents immigrated to Canada from Ethiopia I guess my mom came in the 80s, my dad in the early 2000s. I grew up in a very intimate Ethiopian community in Hamilton, and went to church with the community, and we used to hang out with the community and whatnot. New Year's with the community as well. And after a while, they decided to start a school. So school on Saturdays, where they would teach us our language, our history, and that kind of thing, just keep us engaged with the culture. And I remember all of us kids used to just not pay attention, used to not want to engage. And we would always just quickly run to the gym, or like quickly just do the work so we can just run, and we didn't retain anything. And I think a lot of it, if I was really going to unpack the reasons why I was not as eager to learn about my history and about my culture, was because I didn't see it as Canadian, and it didn't really pertain to me. And it was more that fear that if I did pay attention to it, I wasn't going to be seen as Canadian anymore. And so there's this fear of wanting to be a part of the body of people, wanting to be a part, like the culture you see on TV and you hear in the radio. And I wouldn't listen to my music, and I wouldn't, like to learn how to speak with my parents. And I think a lot of it with us, especially learning, like teaching our kids in terms of education, is that we need to kind of unravel and unlearn this idea that there's a Canadian culture out there. Because Canadian culture is very mosaic, and it's very
that's the thing, it's very mosaic, and you're part of the mosaic.
Exactly. And so that is something I wish someone would have said to me when I was younger, because it's something that I felt like if I didn't have straight hair, if I didn't learn what hockey was, if I didn't learn the game of hockey, if I didn't like eat maple syrup and that kind of thing, I that is the culture I wanted to ingest. I kind of rejected everything else outside that wasn't seen as.
But that's part of racism.
Yeah. So it's a lot of internalized that we learned within. Even I was young, like 8 or 9 in school, wanting to just kind of rather play baseball, like kickball, than learn my own culture. And so
that's saying that one culture is better than another culture.
Exactly.
And that's what we want to eliminate, to get rid of that.
Exactly.
So that people learn all cultures and that all people are human beings.
Mm-hmm. And see, what's interesting was when I grew up, we were going around talking about, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. Because that was coming, I grew up I was small during the civil rights struggle. Like they were talking yesterday about Martin Luther King having marched in Detroit and practiced his speech. Well, I was there as a 2-year-old with my parents. And the main thing I remember about the whole thing is no one wanted to take me to the bathroom because, Dr. King was speaking. But I mean, so for me, learning my culture as a Black Canadian generationally helped me feel more Canadian, because I grew up always feeling like I wasn't Canadian no matter what I tried to do. I mean, whether I permed my hair or whether, I hung out with the white kids or whatever, I just never felt Canadian until I learned of my culture and the history of the contributions of Black people in Canada. So for me, actually learning that stuff now, sadly, I'm so disconnected from my original, African lineage that I don't know necessarily what that culture is. And that presents its own kind of disjunction and discomfiture. But finding some kind of root someplace, like even if it is Canada, allowed me to have some place to grow from.
So I guess I'll move over to the next question. So do you guys see with all of this that we're getting a lot of great stuff here? So in terms of everyone's opinions, do you feel like there is a disconnect in how different generations react, respond, or handle these different events that we see? Like, what difference and similarities do you see, and what are some things the younger generation need to learn or understand in engaging systemic injustices?
I think the younger generation, being that I'm in between generations, needs to recognize that it's been done before and that they're not the first ones to come on. Because a lot of times I've heard people say, and the last generation, they didn't do anything. I beg to differ. They did do things. Every generation has been fighting this thing, and that's part of us knowing our history.
That's the part, because you don't realize how hard the system kept people down in different generations, and how hard people had to work to just try to come together to try to make a change. And as the changes were made, it made it easier for each generation to follow.
Well, that's why I wanted to go back to something that Fevin had said, is that, I always told my son, listen to me when I'm trying to counsel you, because you don't want to make the same mistakes I made. In your life, you should make new mistakes So you're learning new lessons. So I think that part of the education of younger generations, I think they need to connect. We need to have that intergenerational communication, and that, because elders do have experience, and yes, young people do have new ideas and there are new things, but it's the coming together, that sharing of information. It keeps young people from making the same mistakes, so that we're not stopped at the same place every time. You can take from the lessons before and go farther every time. And that's what we need to do intergenerationally. And I think that sometimes younger generations need to remember that the older generations, the things they say, the lessons they try to teach, they are of value and should be respected and to be built upon, not ignored or belittled and thinking that, that everything that you're doing is the first time and you know how to do it all. I think sometimes there's a disconnect in that way.
And I know here in Windsor, we formed the National Black Coalition. And when that came together, it brought together all the diverse Black groups in Windsor. And it was the first time that we began to learn about each other's culture and how it was in the islands and how it was in Nova Scotia and different places that Black people might be living. And knowing that, it enabled us to understand and to work together. And it was the first time we worked together, and we put together what was the first Negro history exhibit in Windsor at the University of Windsor. And before that, people were running around calling themselves the colored instead of Black or Negro. And after that exhibit, they became proud of who they were and started calling each other Negroes. Before that, they called the other word too, because they had they weren't proud of who they were and didn't know their worth. But once they knew that, then they started changing their conversation about what they could do and what they wanted to do, and started thinking about a future for themselves instead of just allowing the system to move them back and forth wherever they wanted them to go. Especially in education, they would put them not in the top classes, but put them in remedial classes. If they were too smart for the courses and were bored, they would put them out into lower classes instead of trying to give them more work to stimulate their minds and get them interested in education.
While I listen, I'm just realizing that I think there's a sort of resiliency that was passed on from the both of you, and just like through the generations of just starting to like realize those injustices that were going on, and then slowly passing on that torch. So I'm first off, just want to say I'm grateful for even hearing all of this. Hopefully we could pass it on as well. But it's just interesting for me when I compare it and contrast it to like the way I grew up, because like Feva, my parents came from Somalia, from their own people, and then try to figure out a way to fit into this Canadian dream that they were sold, right? And slowly started to realize that it was a bit of a mirage. It wasn't all that it was cracked out to be, but their number one survival technique at the time was to conform, right? And to just assimilate, stay quiet, stay down to earth, because we don't want to go back to the war, right? And I guess I'll share like a small story with y'all if you don't mind. But like when I was in high school, like I was getting really great grades. I became president of student council, whatever the case may be. But like I still lived in this area where the police would ID me every single day. And there was one incident, someone got robbed in school or something. And I was coming back for a student council meeting, and the principal was in front of the school, all these police officers, and said it was him. And they pointed at me. And like I got arrested, had no idea what was going on, got sent to the station. And after an hour or two of me like really confused eating beef patties there, telling them I don't know what they're talking about, they told me that I'm free to go. And they actually caught who did it, right? So I go back to school thinking that like, I thought I earned the trust of the faculty and the students here. And I asked the principal what happened. It was a white woman. And she just told me like, well, they described who it was, and they said it was a Somali guy, and you're like one of the only Somali guys here. So they thought it was you. And I was just really confused. So I went and I talked to my mom and my dad about it, and they were just like, yo, Abdi, like, we told you shouldn't be wearing these hats you're wearing, and you shouldn't be wearing those clothes you're wearing. And we told you keep a low profile, you know? And I was just like, where's the support? But I started to realize, like, they just wanted me to survive. And again, like, that they embedded in themselves that survival technique of, like, just stay under the radar, don't make too much noise, and watch out for them peoples, you know? And it's something that I appreciate for them because they did it out of love, you know? But knowing what I know now, I'll make noise if that happened to my children, you know? I wouldn't let that happen, because that actually put me into a mentality and a mind state where I actually did start to change the way I reflected myself. Like, I started to dress a bit differently, talked a bit differently, you know? Like, it was crazy. So I'm appreciative of the fact that, Patricia, you just kept on the fire going, and I see it here now. So,
may I share a story about my son? It's almost, well, it's not similar, but it's about, the stereotyping. My son, when he was in grade 5, was going to school for career day. Now, my son likes to think of himself as an entrepreneur. They had, in class, they had deer time, drop everything and read. And my son noticed that people in his classroom didn't have things to read. So he had this briefcase that he would take to school, and he had code books in it and things, for people to read who play video games. And he would rent them to his classmates, 5 cents in class. If they wanted to keep it overnight, 10 cents, right? So he had this briefcase together already. So for career day, he decides he's going to dress up, like a businessman. He put on this coat he had, and I call it, it's too big, so you're going to wear it again next year coat. You buy a coat for 2 years when your kids are little, right? So they grow into it. So this was the 2 big years. So it was a long coat on him, had a fake fur collar. My son's name is Vincent. He thinks of himself as Vince the Platinum Prince. So to top off his look, he has some shades, right? So he goes into school, right? In this coat, this briefcase, the shades, tipping in, right? His teacher says to him, oh, you look just like a drug dealer. Not the CEO of a national corporation, not a businessman, drug dealer. So yes, you best believe I marched up to that school and I made some noise. And she wanted to say that for everybody. I said, I beg to differ. You would not have said that to a white child. Your first thought of a white child's business would not have been a drug dealer. So really no matter how you dress, they're going to have those perceptions about you, because that is just a part of the way that prejudice works. In another story, because I always like to tell people when I'm doing my teachings that we have to understand that we are basically all racist and all prejudiced in some ways because we all get the same cultural conditioning. And I'll tell a story about how I was walking down the street one night and this group of young Black men came walking towards me around the corner, and my first instinct was to cross the street until I looked closely and saw that it was my son and his friends, which just shows how ridiculous, that the conditioning that we ingrain, even subconsciously without wanting to, how it impacts upon us emotionally first, because by the time I took a deep breath and thought about it, then I was like, damn, that was stupid. So these are the kinds of things that we have to also get our friends and our allies to understand, even those that aren't necessarily allies, that, there is a lot of cultural conditioning that we have to overcome. But I agree that at the same time, we can't just depend on them, because like I said, once they're comfortable again, they'll forget about us. That I've seen happen before.
I love the honesty. Thank you for that.
Yeah, just to tie into that, I mean, even going back to that question we were asking about sustainable and permanent change, we have to not just look at the systems that we literally create, but we also need to consider our own hearts. Like, we need to do the work of looking into our hearts and challenging ourselves, asking questions about our biases, and yeah, we have to do that work if we're really thinking about the changes that we want to see in society, because that's exactly where it begins. It begins right there. We create from that place. So,
yes, I know. Coming here from the United States and being an American, growing up in the United States, and then living in Canada, I found that I wasn't even accepted as a Black person in Canada for a while. I had to grow into the community because my experience growing up was much different than the Canadian experience. And when I was first here, they looked at people from the United States as being the bad people because that's what they saw in the media. They were crooks and not educated. But I came from an educated family, and when I was here, I had to guard my own children because they were in an all-white community and they weren't accepted that much by the Black community. So I put them into sports and got them active in things that they could be interested in and be accepted as equals in their endeavors.
I feel that a lot. That's the thing.
Equal, Mom, equal.
Well, accepted.
I feel like it's flipped, whereas it's the same. It's a mix of what Abdi is saying, what Patricia is saying. Whereas for me, whenever I'm in a position where when I see like white people around me, my instinct, if I see like a group of white men walking, my instinct is to cross the street. Or if I see like a white woman and she's walking behind me, my instinct is to step to the side and let her walk. I don't want her walking behind me because there's this sense of paranoia that I now have towards the white community as a result of everything that I'm seeing online. And on top of that, with my brother, my little brother is 17, and he's growing into his own, where he's starting to grow into his own style and finding clothes that he likes to wear and like is expressing himself. And he's a runner, so he's in sports, and so he's jacking himself up a bit. So he's a big boy, he's a big man. And so when I see him wearing certain things, I bite my tongue because I don't want to police his clothing. But it's like, I know I'm doing it for the fear of like, if something happens, if someone sees him as suspicious, I don't want anything to happen to him. And there's this one instance where we were in Fortino's shopping together. We were shopping for my parents. And he wanted to break off to buy like some protein for himself, some protein powder for himself. And so I let him go. And so when I'd done my shopping and I went to go look for him, that he was talking with a man that looked like a security guard. And so my heart literally dropped, and I found myself running to see what was going on. And so I'm speed walking to my brother, and it turns out it wasn't a security guard. It was just a white man that looked like a security guard, and they were talking about protein shakes. And so that fear was literally like coming from nothing, but just the way it looked, like an authority figure talking to him and stuff. I just felt this urge to like protect my younger brother and to protect my family and whatnot. So there's a lot of, I like with me, like living today, there's a lot of paranoia around.
I do agree that today there is a change in that, because I find myself being rather uneasy around white people a lot too, because there seem to be a lot of Karens out there, and a lot of white people who presume that they can tell Black people what spaces they can and cannot be in, and where they belong and where they don't belong. And I'm just afraid that if I do get approached with someone to do that, I might go off and get myself in trouble. But yeah, I do feel uncomfortable more so than before because of there's a resurgence of that. At the same time that there are a lot of white allies, it seems like the people who are entrenched in their racism seem to be almost more entrenched and more emboldened to let you know that they still want to make sure that you stay in your place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, I don't want to like overshare. I have another short story, I guess, if you have the time, if you don't mind. But Like, yeah, like I feel like there's a sort of PTSD when like we go through these things on a regular day basis. So quick, like my mom is a school bus driver, as a number of like my aunts are as well. And the number of school drivers in the city of Toronto are minorities. They're people that look like us or other people of color. And I remember like a couple of years ago, I was just out of a job, out of money. My mom's like, yo, they're hiring for a secretary in the office. I was like, that's cool. So I applied. And I actually ended up being the first Black person ever to work in that office, right? And that was as a secretary position. But the systems were just so outdated that anytime there was a different change on the bus route, they would take off one child's name and reprint hundreds of copies for everyone in the entire stock transportation district, which made no sense to me because I knew how Google Docs worked, right? So I actually took the time, speaking of Google Docs, and I put all the information on the Google Doc, told them pay me a bit of extra money, and I revamped the whole system with something that was pretty simple for me. But for them, it was like mind blowing because it was just all white women that worked there, and I was like the only Black person there, let alone a male. So it was something that was awkward because they actually promoted me to regional manager as soon as I did it, and like I was cool with the pay raise, whatever. But there was two types of people in that office. One, the person that was like, how did this person get this job and get a promotion when I've worked here for 20 years, right? They were mad. And the second one was, I don't know what this kid's on, but I gotta be his friend, you know? Like I needed to see where this kid's going, you know? So there's a lady, like no one was ever mean to me particularly, right? Well, after I got my own office, there was someone that came into my office and she was in that second category of wanting to be my friend. And I was cool with that. She came in, but she said something really problematic. I think I'll let you be the judge of it, right? She came in and she said, listen, you know, my son has a half Black friend. I call him my mulatto baby, all right? Looking at her like, okay. She's like, and I always tell them to stop saying N-word this and N-word that without saying N-word. She actually said the whole thing, right? She's like, N-word this, N-word that. And like, I always tell them, don't say the N-word because the N-word's bad word. She said the N-word about like 40 times in a sentence. And I'm just sitting there like, wow, this is really going on right now, you know? And I let her finish and took that moment to try to educate her. The root word of the word mulatto, the fact that although she might be comfortable saying that we're a son and a half Black friend, like it's not okay with me. And I really like try to stay calm and not fit into that angry Black guy trope, right? But I told her like I'm calling HR, like this is unacceptable, whatever the case may be. It's like, Abdi, I've been working for 15 years. If I get fired for this, like how am I going to feed my family, so on and so forth. But I still called HR and they fired her after I made like a very formal, long-winded complaint. And the rest of the office hated me for that. And they made me working there like a passive-aggressive hell to be in, you know? And I eventually quit. But it was just like, after that, I realized like, even when I took the approach of not being the angry Black guy and I try to work within their own systems, right? They still give me hell for it. And at that moment, I realized like, either way I lose, you know? So I just wanted to work within my own people from there because that was crazy for me.
So it seems like this theme of PTSD is kind of synonymous with all of us in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we kind of deal with that and move on with that? How do we kind of work towards healing these forms of, I guess, stress that have been induced through being forced to kind of be in survival mode or in protection mode for a while? What has helped you guys in terms of healing, or at least dealing with the effects that comes with being upfront with going through systems, with approaching individuals who are being problematic and activism and stuff and whatnot?
You know,
I'll tell you, you never get over the stress from the beginning. It follows you all the way through life, and it is hurtful. It's traumatic. But you have to keep working, and you have to realize who you are. And once you know your history, you've got the hand up on everything, because we were the first. We were the people who brought human beings onto this earth. So knowing that, and everybody came afterwards with mutations or whatever they might have been, but we still have the original genes, and we have the original power and intelligence. If you notice, in all of the areas where people of color are, we always rise to the top once they get the knee off of our neck. We can move, and we do, and then we help others. And that's been part of the whole thing. If we can move and help others and make this world a better place, that might be our mission.
I've been thinking about this question kind of a lot recently. And it's been on my mind because I feel like I don't really have a good answer when, let's say, what month is it now? What year is it now? But I guess earlier and around May or so, when things were kind of starting to get really heated, I almost felt like, in contrast, like I went into hibernation, because everywhere I looked, you're looking on your phone, like you turn on the TV, like the radio, etc. You're just being bombarded by these images of Black people being harmed and killed, etc. Right? And I was talking to a friend about this, and one of the things that kind of stuck, and Fabian, I think you mentioned the whole the cycle of trauma, is that when these sort of things happen, at least this is how it is for me. It's not just that you're responding to this one, death, or the kind of unfortunate, the string of deaths in one period of time, but it's kind of like everything that's happened before that all gets brought back up. My first kind of awareness, if you want to call that, of this kind of cycle was when Trayvon Martin was killed in 2012, I believe. I was 18. And so thinking about everything that's happened since then, with the news of George Floyd's death, that's not just grief for, George Floyd or even Breonna Taylor, but it's grief for all of the past 8 years. It's 8 years worth of grief come anew again. And that's really difficult to try and bear and kind of work through. So I don't know, that's something that I've been kind of struggling with myself. And like I said, my instinct was to kind of retreat and kind of do a protective bubble, but I don't necessarily think that that's the most effective self-care strategy. So I don't know, what do you guys think?
The amount of time.
I know when I was a teenager, my father, who came from the South and told us all about racism in the South, segregation and so forth. And I even took a bus trip to the South once and found out that it was all true. At a certain area, Cincinnati, I was told that I had to get in the back of the bus, that I couldn't ride in the front or the middle part of the bus. And my father told us that his uncle, I think it was my grandfather's brother, killed a white man. And he did this because the white man killed his friend in front of his family. And my great uncle came north, and once he reached Cincinnati, he melted into the population there, and they never found him. But he ended up in Ypsilanti, where I grew up, and we didn't know him. We just knew he was a friend of my father's, because my father knew who he was and his family. And we knew him by the name of Mr. Wallace instead of Neely. And when I found out that he fought back and actually stood up to a white man, I felt proud. I thought, well, and they never found him, and he lived a reasonable life in Ypsilanti with his family after that. And that gave me, a little feeling of you can fight back and you can win. Even if you have to hide sometimes, you still have to push to get things done that you think have to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know for me, it's, I find myself every time I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed with everything that I'm seeing on social media. I think the thing is, like, at this point, in this day and age, there's no way you can get away from it. Everyone is connected on their phone. Everyone's addicted to their phone. And then so addicted to their laptop. So it's like when you're on your phone, you get the urge to look at your phone, it's right there in front of you. And then so the amount of times I have literally ran away. I have a friend who owns a farm up north in Creemore. And so every time I'm feeling stressed, the 2 times or the 3 times that I've been there has been a result of me feeling overwhelmed and stressed by the heaviness of the political sphere that we're all dealing with.
Well, you have to stop looking at your phone. You have to stop looking at the TV. You have to listen to music, and you have to go out and take walks, long walks, and do little things that seem to make you happy. Just stay away from it for a while, and then come back and see what's happening.
Yeah, I was going
to be there.
I was going to ask how you guys feel about like trying to balance between, on the one hand, if you feel this, like the need to be like, well, I've got to stay informed. I need to know what's going on, because how can I talk about this if I'm not kind of educated, right? But versus like the very real need of, I feel overwhelmed, like this is too much for me and I need to like take a break. Do you ever feel like any like conflict or maybe even like guilt if you're like, this is too much for me, like I have to take a break?
Yeah, I think I'm going through that right now myself. It's like those periods of burnout that we were talking about, because like we've all mentioned a number of times, like if we don't do this work, like who will, And then it gets to the point where the work in itself will remind you of things that have happened in your life, right? For example, I'll share, like, I work very closely with like issues of gun violence in the city of Toronto. But personally, I've had like more than 30 of my close family and friends pass away due to it. So almost every time I'm doing the work, it reminds me of somebody or something that's happened. And it's just like, I want to take a break. I want to have fun, which I do more times when I'm off. But like, sometimes I just want to say, like, I think I need to just like not do this anymore. Like, the thought crosses our mind every once in a while. We're human, and something else will happen where I'm just reminded, like, I find joy and happiness in it. I find joy knowing that, like, although this might have happened before, I could prevent this from happening to somebody else. And then we see that small glimmer of light and that hope, like Patricia was talking about, of that better future. Like, it keeps me going personally. So I just try to like celebrate those small wins with myself, whether that's in the form of a cool conversation I had with someone, or a youth that like became a better person and I reconnect with them, or seeing some change in my community. Like, I try to celebrate those small wins, because that's usually what keeps me going.
Mm-hmm. I did a picture abstract, and I named it Glimmer of Light. Because as you go through life, I've seen the worst and I've seen the best, and I've seen hope come through all the time. And it is gradually getting better. Mm-hmm. Even though this time seems so traumatic, that's because of the news, the mass media, and you hear it all the time and you see it all the time. Mm-hmm. But even in that, you hear the bad part and you can hear the good part, and you know that there always is a movement towards the best. And this is what I'm seeing now, that what's happening in the United States with an idiot as a president. They're finally waking up to the fact that if you put prejudice and discrimination at the top, you can see it. It's all over. And that's it. You can see it now. It's all over. You can't deny it. So people know what they're moving for and what they're working towards, the equality and justice for all. And that's a good sign.
Yeah. So for me, one of the things that helps to kind of ground me, I mean, I feel like I'm still kind of new, like just entering into this in some way, but it's just knowing where you derive your value, knowing where you derive your worth, and keep coming back to that place. For me, it's my faith, and just continuing to be nurtured by that. So then I have roots established somewhere that I know that will just continue to help me to refocus in a way, so that I can enter back in with a refreshed sense of, you know, who I am, and just continue to move forward with that. I don't even know how to like kind of frame it, but just to continue to move forward, knowing that that's where I derive my sense of self, right? That's kind of helped me so far through this process.
Well, there's no other group of human beings that has had to endure the type of trauma that Black people have. Mm-hmm. And yet we survive. Mm-hmm. And yet we move forward, and we go to the top. We're there, and we got to keep going. That's it. We've got it, and we've got to do it. Mm-hmm. They won't do it for us. We've got to do it.
Mm-hmm. Just want to give a note that we're at 8:25 right now. Mm-hmm. So
should we have, I think we have room for one more question. Sure. Okay. So there was a question about what role you would like to see allies play in the current movement. How can non-Black people express support in times like these? And Abdi, I know you were saying something already about allies and how we shouldn't really be relying on them too much. I want to ask, in terms of allyship, and when each of you were growing up in terms of being involved in activism, what was the focus in allyship there? In terms of what was the, like, was it a major focus in terms of trying to change people's minds and trying to get people along on the journey, or was it more about our community moving forward, creating change by us, for us, with each other?
Well, I was in a group of women called the Panel of Concerned Women. And what we did, all of us wrote a speech on how prejudice and discrimination affected us personally. Mm-hmm. And we found out that everybody in the group, even white people, are discriminated against at times. And once we have a common issue that we can work on, then it's easier to learn more about each other and be interested in what happens to each other. And we're all in this together. The only way we can put things right again is to realize our power, and to realize that we can't do it alone. This is mainly the white man's problem. Mm-hmm. And once we get them to see their problem and how they have spread it all around the world, then maybe things will begin to take hold faster, because now this movement has spread around the world. And even in the UK, where there aren't that many Black people, most of the people out in the street marching are white. Mm. But that's what it has to be. They started it. Let them clean up the mess.
Yeah, I was thinking something. I remember back in, was it 2017, when the whole Tiki Torch March incident happened? the group of alt-right white supremacist young men chanting "will not replace us," etc. And at the time, there was kind of a lot of, on social media, there was a lot of hand wringing in various kind of Black communities of like, oh no, like, what will we do? How will we kind of teach white people that this is not okay? And my thought at the time was like, it's not Black people's jobs to convince white people that white supremacy is not cool. Other white people need to do that work.
Exactly. It's
Other
their
white
job.
people who are not racist need to be like, hey, you know what? This is not it. This is not the
Clean
way
up your own mess.
Yeah. But like, I mean that labor should not be thrown onto Black people.
Right.
It's if white people want to kind of learn from our community, like draw resources, etc., whatnot, but that labor shouldn't be on us to fix a problem that is within white communities, I think.
That's right.
Yeah, I'll tie even into that. A big thing I've realized when it comes to like, I guess I'll call it the fight for allyship almost, right? Is there's a lot of like white guilt and white fragility, right? Where when they come to terms with the fact that, oh my God, the system I've been living in has directly been evolved with killing all of these people. Oh, I'm gonna need a minute, But it's like, if you're uncomfortable with that going on and you just came to this realization, please don't take a break because social media put some pressure on you for 1 week. We've been living like this. I can't take the skin off of my hand. You know what I mean? So I feel like when it comes down to that specifically, I guess, if their valid feelings are that they're really stressing out about that, take some time for that with your own selves and your own people. But when it comes to a conversation about what we could do to battle systematic racism, we don't have time to hear that right now. There's a bigger fight at play. And when it really comes down to it, I guess like when it comes to allyship, it's really hard for me because as like part of my religion and it's like my beliefs, I'm forced to see the best in people, right? So even if like per se, you might have been complicit in the system, you might have just been born into it and like not have known any better. But then I really start to think, and it's like, I don't think that excuse bears weight anymore. It's impossible for you have not to known any better. It's all over the news, like everybody knows about it. So now that you know that and you're turning a blind eye, as much as I might be begging you, a lot of us are like, it's a hard term to swallow, but a lot of us are begging them to like realize like our lives are worth something. Please, like, treat us like human beings. And if they're still ignoring it at that point, like, it's hard for me to do anything else but like just forget about it. Like, I don't want to work with them anymore. I just want to work with my people. And I think that's where I've gotten to a certain level, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very fortunate in that with the work I do, I get in front of audiences of kids as young as grade 3 and 4. And I have often a platform to tell them that young that, look, it's white people that made
That's amazing.
racism. It's white people that have to fix it. And I say, look, I'm not saying it's to cast aspersions or anything, but I mean, it's white people that control everything. And I would say, I mean, look at the TV. Most of what you see on TV is decided upon by white people who, for economic reasons, perpetuate negative images of Black and brown people, and then I'll tell them, well, I can't say anymore that, it's even like white people that Band-Aids are made for because, finally we're getting, some tone in the Band-Aids. But, I would point out to them the different things. I'd say, you go to a movie and if there are 2 Black people in the movie, then all of a sudden it's a Black movie because it's not just white people, So I would point out to them a whole different types of examples of where that exists, but I get a chance to impress upon them and plant seeds. I like to think of myself as Johnny Appleseed when they're really young. And so I feel really privileged to be able to do that.
Peach crayon is skin color. That's the one I remember when growing up. I was like, what?
Well, they did that Colors of the World box a few years ago, but it was a bunch of shades of white, and then there was a medium and a dark. So.
Well, when I was teaching, I was sometimes teaching an all-white class. Mm-hmm. And I remember walking into the class for the first time once, and one of the students asked me, what are you? And I told her, a human being. And then she wanted to know, well, why are you teaching this course? And I told her, because I'm qualified. And she just let it go. She couldn't say anything else after that.
Mm-mm.
So if she wanted to stay there, she could. If she wanted to leave, she could leave. But she stayed, and she finally realized that Black people can teach interior design.
Another thing too, that's I've never actually in all of my years in school have ever had a Black teacher.
I've had one in university.
Yeah, even in university, I haven't had a Black teacher. Even
me neither. My whole life.
I didn't either.
And I dropped that course.
I was fortunate enough to spend some time in school in the States. But in Canada, I had one Black teacher, and she taught history, and she tried so hard not to look Black, it wasn't even funny. But I called her Ma. I just let everybody know. I said, you know,
claim her by force.
so that, you know, everybody knew that, you know, like we're the same and everything. But yeah, no, I was fortunate enough when my mom, you know, got her master's degree, we moved to the States. Mm-hmm. And at first, my sister and I didn't want to move to the States because in the high school where we were at, where we were 2/3 of the Black students out of 1,500 students, we were just starting to make friends. At that point, I was in grade 11, she was in grade 9. But my mom wanted us to go visit the school before we went there, you know, just to take a look. And first of all, when we drove up to the school, there's a big banner, welcome to the Canadian athletes, because they knew that we were athletes coming there. So that was one thing. Then we walked into the school and we looked, and there were so many Black people. We were like, oh, hell yeah, we're coming here, you know? And we had at least 3 or 4 Black teachers there and a Black population. And it was the first time that I was like, wow, I actually feel like I belong someplace.
What about your uncle?
Well, he wasn't my teacher though, but he was one of the Black teachers at the school, but I didn't take art. But it was such a difference because like my mom said, we grew up in a white neighborhood where we weren't accepted by the white kids completely. And we were, most of the Black kids in town thought we were too good for them because we lived in a white neighborhood, but we just didn't know them. And, you know, there I go, falling off again. I got this propped up so I don't have to look down so much. My glasses are weird. But yeah, being in a place where there were like Black teachers and other Black people, it was like a whole new world. It was a whole new experience.
That experience.
And I would advise everybody, personally, I would advise every Black Canadian to try to go to school at a historic Black university in the States. If I would have known about the HBCUs, I most assuredly would have gone there. But particularly as a Black Canadian, it is such a nurturing and reinforcing environment from what I've come to understand that you will get a whole new concept of yourself and who you are and what you mean to the price of rice in China, differently from what you get in Canada.
Mm-hmm. I definitely feel that. I actually had that exact same experience, except it was when I went to Ethiopia for the first time. When I went back and visited my family, it was a complete, because here I always have to deal with white fragility. I always have to deal with everyone's uncomfortability to talk about race, to talk about the things that are happening to our community members. And my mind always goes back when I'm having these conversations and I'm feeling this frustration. My mind always goes back to when I went to Ethiopia for the first time, and I was just surrounded by everyone that looked like me, and it was a different feeling. It's a different feeling because you go to another place and you're not a minority anymore, and you don't have to worry about, crossing the street. You don't have to worry about people making dumb remarks about your hair or your skin. And so you don't feel alienated anymore. And so when you come here and you try to communicate that to everyone else, and then it doesn't work as well. And then your mind goes back to how you felt when you were in that space where you felt like you finally belonged somewhere. And it's like,
well, my son, my youngest child, went to California to spend a year with my youngest brother. And he went to an all-black school, Crenshaw, which was an all-black school in California, Los Angeles. And he said the first day that he went to school, he walked in and he looked and he saw all the Black kids and he was afraid. Mm. And when he went back home and he told my brother that he was afraid of all of those kids, my brother told him to go look in the mirror. And then he realized, you know, he'd been socialized in Canada and he'd been in all white schools and hadn't been in an entirely Black school to see that many Black people at one time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he eventually came around and he really enjoyed his year at Crenshaw High School.
Okay, so we have to wrap. Does everyone have any last words?
Oh, man,
I just wanted to say thank you to everybody here for even having me part of this conversation. Thanks, Fevin, for reaching out. And I wanna hopefully work with all of you all soon, and I want to learn more. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that. I was gonna say, Vivian, I know that we have a civil rights question up on here, and maybe we need to have an entire episode just talking about, you know, that history and how it's reflected right now. I think we need a whole different segment on that. But yeah, just on a whole, I really appreciate you, Patricia and Leslie and Appy, for coming and for sharing your insight, your wisdom, your experiences. It's so awesome when we can do this as a community and just learn from one another and bond to move forward.
Yeah. Well, once you get into civil rights, you never get out of it.
Thanks. It's been an honor and a privilege to speak with all of you and meet all of you and just, you know, hear about some of the other things that are going on, because I'm always hopeful. Like, I've been doing the work that I've been doing in schools for over 20 years. And in those 20 years, there's definitely a difference in the young people and the way they're working and the focus. And it gives me great hope to see younger generations still so focused and active, especially at this time, because that kind of energy is really, really necessary at this very time. So thank you.
Well, I want to say thank you too for inviting me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed seeing and hearing your stories and your side of what you have come through in this tumultuous time that we're living in. And keep moving forward. We'll make it.
Patricia, you're really the glimmer of light yourself, honestly. Thank you. It's been great, guys. I gotta hop into a work meeting, but thank you so much. I hope to talk to you all soon.
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Abdi.
Thank you for joining.
I'll try and catch the rest of this NAACP town meeting.
Yeah. Well, so just quickly, would you guys be open for another session at another time?
Sure.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. That's awesome.
I just want to say I enjoy having conversations like these so much, because I know how much our diaspora is a little fragmented. Mm-hmm. And I know that one of the goals is to put us all under the same, under the same umbrella, under the same light, because we are facing this together. And so having these conversations brings so much joy and energy, because it's that diaspora coming together and everyone kind of bringing their own respective stories together and history together to educate each other on the different ways we experience our Blackness in our community. So I'm very grateful for everyone right now.
It's healing, right?
It's very healing.
I was going to say, I feel like I'm talking to my aunties and my cousins. It's very and I didn't realize, I was like, oh man, I needed this talk. So thank you guys. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. To everyone that is going to be watching this on our IGTV series, I hope you have taken away something you've learned something valuable that you can bring to your own respective family and friends. Thank you, everyone, for participating and enjoying this beautiful conversation that is filled with so much great stuff. And your wise words have, penetrated my mind. And if I'm probably going to go out here later reflecting, and I encourage everyone else that's going to be watching this to reflect on everything that we've been saying and communicating through this series. So remember to check our social media for updates. We'll be putting everyone's work and their handles in an accessible place on our social media so that people can kind of reach out to you guys if they have questions, or look at your work and feel inspired to do their own kind of work in a similar stream. So yeah, thank you.